Hello everyone. So, Preservation is getting some pretty good buffs coming next week. And it's actually exactly what we needed and exactly what we have been asking for a little bit now. Some of these changes aren't really that clear. We are getting some straight up buffs to healing, but also some confusing mana and damage changes, plus a nerf to a previous tier set. So, let's go over really quickly what the changes actually mean, and what even to we getting a nerf to the previous tier set, that is actually great, exactly what we wanted, and pretty much just overall greatness coming from us. Let's check the changes one by one. First of all healing of our spells and abilities is getting increased by 5%. The one thing you have to know about this is that even though it says 5%, you're not actually gaining just 5% healing overall. This is basically because of how several of preservation abilities works, like Golden Hour and Rewind. The healing of these spells isn't actually based on like your character or your gear or your stats, but actually in how much damage the person you cast them on has taken, so it doesn't scale at all with effects like this. The rest of your healing does though, and things like Consume Flame and Dream Breath and Burden Embrace are getting increased by it. Another thing to consider here is that Insurance is also part of the class aura, which means Insurance is also getting an increase of 5%. Now, Spirit Bloom is getting increased by 10% too. This is a little bit weirder too, because the current most meta building rate as Flame Shaper doesn't actually cast the Spirit Bloom that much. It's not a big part of your healing. You still use it though, and it's a pretty good spot heal filler in between your ramps, but it's not like your main source of healing. Chrono Warden does get a lot of use out of Spirit Bloom. It's the main way you deliver healing via Lifeline, and it's pretty high up there in how much its healing matters to you. For Mythic Plus though, Spirit Bloom is your bread and butter. It's like your main ability and your main way to deliver healing to everyone. So 20% of Spirit Bloom in Mythic Plus is actually a huge increase. Overall, combining these two changes and considering that Rewind and Golden Hour are not increased by the aura buff, someone smarter than me, Bulk, has already done the math of this, and it should math out to between a 5 and a 6% healing increase for you without changing anything. Now, let's go on some of the weirder parts of the buff. Energizing Flame is an effect that refunds mana when you cast Living Flame on an enemy. It used to be 50% on the cost, and it's now becoming 80% of the cost. This is actually pretty good and exactly what the spec needed to fix some pretty fundamental design flaws. But if you don't know about it, you might need some context. Casting Living Flame on the boss for damage is a thing Preservation does as a filler. In between your ramps and where there's nothing to heal, you do this to contribute some damage to your raid and also to generate essence bursts. The problem is that as Flame Shaper, Living Flame does very little damage, it does almost nothing, and it costs a pretty chunk of mana, so even though you're recovering 50% of the cost, you're still actively wasting mana in Living Flame. On top of that, even if you generate Essence Burst by casting it, you're just gonna use those Essence Bursts casting Echo, which is already a pretty low cost spell, so you're not actually saving that much mana. The end result of all of this is that casting Living Flame of the boss a lot of time was just not worth it, and you will actually prefer to use the standard AFK doing nothing instead of casting Living Flame. This was pretty bad. But it was necessary because otherwise you would run out of mana. And out of all the things that you could stop casting to save a mana, Living Flame was just the one that did the less healing, so you just stopped doing that, which felt pretty bad because you were standing AFK instead of doing anything during a boss fight. Refunding 80% of the mana cost instead means you can freely cast Living Flame as the boss as many times as you want and you won't go out of mana from it, which means you can actually cast your fielder now. This is a great fix to your gameplay. It should also have some knock-on effects on Mythic Plus when you're casting many more Living Flames, but the mana thing in Living Flame is a pretty different world. You were playing with your mana in several different ways in there, so it's a little bit more complicated, but it will also help a lot, just in a different way. Now, for the damage increases, this is pretty interesting. Because Preservation is playing Flame Shaper in raid, you're missing out on things like Chrono Flame and Life Force Mender, which means your Living Flame, which is your damage filler spell, was doing very little damage. So even if you casted a lot of them, which as we just discussed was not really doable because you will run out of mana, you will not actually contribute a significant amount of damage. This is especially egregious in a tier where other healers like Miss Weaver and Discipline Priest are contributing a substantial amount of damage for free. So yeah, Preservation needed a buff to its damage, and 25% on both damage spells is pretty good. You're still not gonna press Disintegration rate ever, but 25% more damage in Living Flame made your filler might actually do something now. As for Mythic Plus, this is actually a pretty big increase. You're already playing Chrono Warden on it, and using Life Force Mender, which means your Living Flames are already much stronger start than they are in raid. On top of that, some playstyles actually use Disintegrate for damage. So at the end, this is just a 25% increased damage to every single target you might do, and a little bit of AoE, considering Firebird also sends Living Flames to enemies, and Living Flame does too. An important thing to note here is that even to Disintegrate is getting a buff, it doesn't actually make it better for damage than what it was before compared to Living Flame, because both spells are getting the same buff. There are actually some considerations here regarding caps, because part of Living Flame damage come from Scarlet Adaptation and Chrono Flame, which have damage caps. You may have a problem running into the caps with the damage increase, which makes Disintegrate a little bit more of an attractive option. But this is somewhat of a complicated math question, and we'll have to go back on that later. The important thing here is that you don't actually have to change anything. This just plays passively and makes you better. Now, our previous tier set, the Season 1 one, is also getting a nerf, and let me convince you why this is actually a good thing. The Season 1 tier set for Preservation was actually one of the strongest tier sets in the game, ever, at all, for any spec. It was just absurdly strong. So if you wanted to swap to the new tier set, you actually not only needed to have your full 4-piece complete, but also you needed it to be at a pretty higher level to compensate for the immense loss of power from losing the previous tier set. This was pretty bad, because you want to play with your new toys and you want to use your new tier set, because eventually you're going to use it anyway, but the power of the previous tier set was just keeping you tied back there. On top of that, while the power in the tier set was really strong, the gameplay wasn't that great. Playing around temporal compression stacks might be fun for some, but it's actually pretty bothersome and it gets in the way sometimes. It causes unnecessary friction because it doesn't let you cast Firebird whenever you want, because you're on the risk of messing up your stacks and making your empowers weaker and healing for less. The playstyle in the new set is more interactive, more fun, and feels more fluid, and you don't have to be thinking about the annoying temporal compression stacks all the time. And so, an nerf to the previous tier set is pretty good, not because it makes us stronger, because it lets you more easily choose the new tier set over it, which is a much fun playstyle. On top of that, you're also gaining a bunch of stamina, which everybody could use. This is pretty much exactly what Preservation needed. A slight healing increase to catch up to other healers, a bigger buff to Spirit Bloom because we were suffering in multiples more than in raids necessarily, and also because our spot healing in our field spells wasn't that great, a fix to Energizing Flame so we can actually cast Living Flame of the boss as much as we want, and a damage increase so when those Living Flames actually do something, which this is basically the list of all the problems the spec was having so far this patch. Going forwards, you pretty much can expect to feel stronger overall across the board, which is great. Your gameplay is going to feel more fluid and more impactful, simply because you think you're more damage and you're not going to be running out of mana from casting your filler spells. And 5 or 6% extra healing overall is actually more than you would think. It's still going to feel pretty good, and if you were already enjoying the spec, this is going to make it so much better overall. So I think that pretty much covers everything. If you have any questions, feel free to leave it in the comment below, or message me in the Evoker Discord or the Spirit Bloom Pro Discord. Hope you enjoy the buffs, and bye bye.